Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and hello everyone. My name is Nur Hazwani binti Muhammad Ibrahim and my partner is Nurul Izzah binti Rahim. We will present about defects. What is defects? Defects or defective works is where the quality of workmanship and materials are specified in contracts is lacking. It is under contractor's responsibility if the defects occurs because of materials and workmanship. For example, contractor construct the building not accordance to the material as specified in contract and it will lead to the defect. So contractor is responsible for making good defects. Type of defects excluded by the contractor to remedy. First is design work. Defects occur in terms of design is not contractor fault. Usually, this type of defects happen because of design error by the designer teams or due to wrong specification by the consultant teams. This means contractor does not liable to remedy the defective works, but contractor can be entitled to make good defects and will be paid by the client. Second is fair wear and tear. Fair wear and tear are damage that occur through ordinary day-to-day use of the building. Damage caused by wear and tear will not appear within few months, but it will appear within few years. For example, the work is not defective at first, but after a long time, it is not functioning well. It is considered as fair wear and tear. The longer the time, the more difficult to determine of the defect. Third is misuse. Defect occur in terms of misuse also not due to the contractor's fault. Usually, this defect occurs because of misuse by the users. There are two types of defect. Firstly is patent defects. Patent defect is a defect that appears during the contract period and during the defect liability period, DLP. Patent defect can be discovered through a normal examination. For example, you can see the defective door, broken window, or cracks to the ceiling plaster. If the defect appears within the contract period, contractor must make good defect before issuance of Certificate of Practical Completion, CPC, while if the defect appears during DLP, contractor must make good before issuance of Certificate of Completion and Making Good Defect, CCMGD.
Second type of defects is latent defects. Latent defects are defects which are not discovered by a reasonable inspection. It known as hidden defect because it will not appear during construction period or during defect liability period DLP. Usually, latent defect will appear after few years the project has completed when the building has been occupied. Even the DLP of the project has ended, the contractor is still responsible to make good defects until the end of limitation period. If the project use contract under seal, the limitation period usually up to 12 years, while if the project use simple contract, the limitation period will up to 6 years. Standard Form of Contract PWD 203A Form of Contract Revision 2010. Clause about defect in PWD is under Clause 48, which is defects after completion. Clause 48.1 Completion of outstanding work and remedying defects. Clause 48.1a Defect liability period is a period of time that will start after a construction project has been completed or right after the contractor gets Certificate of Practical Completion, CPC. Basically, period of DLP is 12 months as stated in appendix. However, it can also be 24 months by depending on the contract. Generally, DLP is giving contractor an opportunity to remedy the defective works by himself before the client engage the third party to make good defects. For contractor, it will be more economical and efficient to make good defects by himself because if the client engage the third party, contractor must pay the cost of the third party that been engaged by the client. Next, according to clause 48.1a, defect is an imperfection, shrinkage, or fault that happen because of material or workmanship that not in accordance with the contract. The defects happen because of deficiency in quality of the material that been used in the construction of the project and poor workmanship. The use of low quality material can lead to defects problem even the installation of it is done correctly, and poor workmanship can cause the defects work to occur when the workers did not install or done his job properly, or the contractor does not have expertise to do the work. After the construction project is completed, the Superintendent Officer SO will go to the site to do the inspection in order to check whether the contractor's work is completed and done according to the contract. If the SO found defects during his inspection, the contractor must do good defects before the issuance of CPC. The contractor must remedy the defective works as soon as possible if the defective work is urgent, such as the roof is leaking. And if the defective work is not urgent, he can make good defects within the LP. However, if after the project complete and SO did not find any defective works during the inspection, the SO will issue the CPC to the contractor and the LP will start. The SO will issue a written instruction to the contractor to make good all the defective works within the specified time at his own cost, because the defective works occur due to his fault. There are two methods to notify the contractor about defective works, which are written instruction and second, schedule of defects. Basically, the written instruction done by the SO to the contractor in order to specify all the defect works that should be done by the contractor. The written instruction usually be used when the defects problem is urgent, which must be done immediately and cannot wait for the issuance of schedule of defects. While schedule of defects content is list of defects of work to be remedied by the contractor. The schedule of defects can only be issued once. It can be issued during or after the LP, but cannot more than 14 days after the LP ended. And if after the LP end, the SO will do inspection on the defective works, and if he did not find any defects, the contractor will be issued with Certificate of Making Good Defects, CMGD. Next is clause 48.1b. According to clause 48.1b, if there any defective work that SO found during the LP, it shall be listed in the schedule of defects and will be delivered to contractor within 14 days. However, the SO can only issue schedule of defects once. That's why SO should list all the defective works in the schedule. Then, based on PWD 203 form of contract, contractor only has 3 months to make good defects after receiving the schedule of defects. Clause 48.2, Default in remedying defects. Based on clause 48.2, if the contractor fails to remedy the defective works even after instruction has been given, the client can carry on the remedy of defective works by himself, or he can appoint the third party to do the remedial works. The client can recover the money that he spent on the remedial works or to appoint the third party from the contractor. The client can recover his money from the performance bond or consider it as a contractor's debt. Then, the client can also entitle for percentage of on-cost charge, which is 10%, where he can add another 10% on top of the cost of remedial work. Clause 48.3, Diminution in value of works. Irremediable defects are when the defective works are unreasonable, uneconomic, or inconvenient to be remedied. The client has to accept the defective works as it is not reasonable to be remedied. The SO may accept the defective works and determine the value of diminution according to the defective works that cannot be remedied. Value of diminution is done by the SO with calculate the cost of remedy the defective work, and contractor has to pay it back to the client for what he lost. Since the defective works cannot be remedied, the client can be recoverable from what he lost with deduct the amount of diminution from sum payable to the contractor, from performance bond or retention sum, or consider the loss as contractor's debt due under the contract. Clause 48.4 Certificate of Completion of Making Good Defects. After all defective works has been remedied within the 3 months, SO and his team will do a joint inspection with contractor and his team for the last inspection. When the SO is satisfied with all the remedial works, SO will issue CMGD to the contractor, and only one certificate will be issued to the contractor, which will cover all the remedy works in the contract. The original copy of CMGD will be given to the contractor, and copies will be given to all the parties involved in the construction project. Based on the diagram, after DLP, SO will do inspection. If there is no defective works, the SO will issue Certificate of Making Good Defects (CMGD) to the contractor. However, if during inspection SO found defects, he will list all the defective works in Schedule of Defects and issue it to the contractor, not later than 14 days after DLP. After receive the Schedule of Defects, contractor has to make good defects within the specified time, not later than 3 months. After that, SO will do another inspection, and if there is no defects, the SO will issue CMGD to the contractor. However, if they still have defect, the client will appoint another contractor to make good defect. Next is the effect of the certificate. First, once the CMGD is issued, the contractor will be discharged from his obligation for patent defects. Second, the insurance of work coverage and performance bond will end it. Then, another 2.5% of performance bond will be returned back to the contractor. And last, the final certificate will be released. However, even the contractor has discharged from his obligation on patent defects, he is still liable to remedy on latent defects until the end of limitation period.
Standard Form of Contract, PAM Form of Contract 2018. Clause 15.4 Schedule of Defect. Architect will do joint inspection with the engineer and contractor on the completed works by the contractor. The function of contractor joining the inspection is to explain of his work when architect need the detailed information. The LP is start when CPC has issued to the contractor, and at the same time, employer has received the completed project. The LP will end it after 12 months. So, at the end of the LP, architect will do an inspection on the completed works by the contractor. If the architect found any outstanding or defective work that must be made good by the contractor, architect will issue schedule of defect not later than 40 days after the LP. So, if there are any defect that must be rectified by the contractor, architect will issue the list of defect in schedule of defect. Contractor must carry out the remedial work within 28 days from the receipt of schedule of defect. If the contractor fails to make goods, employer can hire third party, but all the costs will be incurred by the contractor as a set-off. The cost will be deducted on the retention sum, money due, or debt. Clause 15.5 Instruction to make goods. Architect can issue an architect instruction in written instruction at any time during 12 months of defect liability period. Architect can issue as many as necessary to the contractor because there is no limitation on architect instruction during the LP. Architect instruction can be issued only DLP. After expiring of DLP, architect cannot issue the instruction because the defect must be listed on the schedule of defect. The written instruction is required to issue if there are any critical defect that need urgent attention by the contractor, and the defect cannot wait for the issuance of schedule of defect. For example, the critical defects are like leaf problem and leakage. Discharge of defect cannot wait for the schedule of defect. Contractor must make good of defect within the reasonable time given by the architect. Cost to rectify the defect is based on the contractor cost. Employer can hire a third party if the contractor fails to make good defect. Clause 15.6 Certificate of Making Good Defect. When the contractor has made good all the defects that have been listed on the schedule of defect within the 28 days, contractor need to give a written notice to the architect. Architect cannot carry out any inspection if the contractor does not inform them on completion of making good defects. Within 14 days, architect must do either one. First, if architect is certified that defect has been made good by the contractor and there are no any defect, architect will issue certificate of making good defect CMGD to the contractor. The original copy of CMGD must be delivered to the contractor, while the copy of CMGD will be extended to the employer and subcontractor. Second, if the contractor has carried out the defect works, but the architect is not certified on the defect that has been made good, architect will issue a notice stating that the reason non-issuance CMGD to the contractor. Effect on Certificate of Making Good Defect CMGD. Contractor obligation on patent defect is over, but for latent defect is still continue based on the period of limitation. Insurance coverage is ended if contractor buy contractors or risk CAR insurance that includes coverage on DLP and extended 3 months coverage. It will expire open issuance of CMGD. Performance bond also leased to the contractor. Another half of retention sum is leased to the contractor. Court case on defect is P&M Kyle Ltd versus Heuser and Diminution Ltd 1972. This case is about the contractor is under an obligation to remedy the defects in accordance with the architect instructions.
Comparison between PWD 203A Form of Contract Revision 2010 and PAM Form of Contract 2018. First is procedure of making good defects. In PWD, under clause 48.1b, after schedule of defects has been issued by the SO within 14 days after the expiry of defects liability period, the contractor must make good defects in 3 months from the receipt of the schedule. While for PAM, under clause 15.4, after schedule of defects has been issued within 14 days after the expiry of defects liability period, the contractor must make good defects in 28 days from the receipt of the schedule or longer period that will be specified by the architect. Second, issuance of certificate of making good defects. For PWD, under clause 48.4, contractor does not have to send any written notice to the SO to inform for his work done. After the contractor done the remedial work, the SO, his team and contractor will do a joint inspection. If the SO is satisfied with the remedial works, he will issue the certificate of making good defect. But if the SO is not satisfied with the remedial work, the client will appoint the third party or another contractor to remedy the defective works. While for PAM, under clause 15.6, when the contractor has done remedied all defective works, he need to send a written notice to the architect. The architect is not allowed to enter the site to do inspection until he got the notice from the contractor. Within 14 days, architect must issue either one. If the architect satisfied with the remedial work, he shall issue the certificate of making good defect. Or, if the architect is not satisfied with the remedial work, he will issue notice stating reasons for non-issuance of certificate of making good defect. That's all from us. Thank you.